This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today. And so, but on the business front, podcasting has brought a lot of that, right? I've met now, almost 2,000 different people in the business in one form or fashion who many times are way ahead of me in business. And it builds a relationship, right? It's built a
Yeah.
connection, and they're reaching back out to me for something, or I'm reaching back out to them to help in some way, or to ask a question. And I think the podcast has done that in such a big way, and like you said, numerous benefits. But why don't you hammer on that just a minute? Some of the other benefits about podcasting, and hey, if you're not doing a podcast, here's some reasons why, especially if you're in business or in the real estate business or whatever, why you should really consider this.
Yeah, I mean, I think podcasting, like I said, number one, it's a great way to market your brand and build relationships and network with people. I think I've gone on trips, I've gotten free product, like I've gotten awesome collaborations and partnerships, but it's the people that I've met through podcasting that have impacted my life. Some of my best friends today are people that have been on my show, or I've been on their show. But it's just been an amazing journey through podcasting of pushing myself. Like I still worked a full-time job up until the end of this last year. And unfortunately, fell to some of the layoffs that are happening across the world. But through that full-time, I knew that I wanted to do a podcast. And so I get up at 4 a.m., 6 days a week to make sure that my podcast is being worked on every single day. It's like any craft out there, but podcasting, again, so beneficial around the business side of stuff, but it's also a mental thing for me too, because I know that when I get up, I'm excited because this is what I love. I love talking with people and networking with people and hearing their story. And I think it's so important to share your story. And there's a lot of people out there that are shy and they don't want to step into that, but that's really where you see growth, right? You get out of your comfort zone. And if you can do that on your podcast, whether it's a solo show or you're interviewing people, like get out and just share your story, even if you don't release it, right? Like just keep it for your legacy, for your tribe down the line so they can hear your story.
Why don't you speak to some of the how-tos around getting started in podcasts and maybe some crucial things that even around launching, maybe that I get questions about that often, and it's probably changed. And unfortunately, I didn't know any of these things when I started,
Sure.
the podcast, that I've learned now, but I know you're a lot better at this than I'll ever be. So, speak to some crucial things around a successful launch, some things you need to think through maybe before starting your show that are crucial, solo, versus interviewing, whatnot.
Yeah, most of the time I would tell people that go through my courses is look, find other podcasts out there that are maybe talking about a similar topic that you want to talk about. And when you're launching a podcast, launch something that you're passionate about, right? It could be quilting, it could be shoveling snow, like whatever you're passionate about, there's going to be people that are going to listen to that. And if you go to search on podcast and you don't find one, launch it because people are needing that and just someone hasn't launched it yet. But there's probably a likelihood that you'll find a podcast out there that's similar to the topic that maybe you want to talk about. So number one, look out there, see what other people are doing, pick bits and pieces off that you like. Hey, I like how they did that intro, or I like how they inserted that ad in there, or I like that type of question, right? Go do your research, find something, but don't let that hold you back from actually launching. Like I think too many people get hung up and like, oh my gosh, I have so much stuff to do. I want to get this lined up. Launch it, right? And number two, I would say is record 5 to 8 episodes before you launch your first episode. And I didn't do that, but I would say the reason because I didn't know, right? I had to go through this journey on my own. I didn't even know what about Apple Podcast. I was 100 episodes in. I was just releasing to YouTube and called that a podcast. And so I was like, well, how do I listen on Apple? And I was like, what the heck is that? Right. So I learned through failure in this. So what I would say is record 5 to 8 episodes before you launch your show, because if you just go release one, that puts a lot of pressure on you to release that second one and that third one right away. Build up your queue, then go to release it. And once you do release it, email it to your friends, message it to your family, right? Say, hey, check this out. Please just go listen to it. Even if it's a few minutes, I would just love the support. If you could subscribe to it, leave me a review. That would be awesome. One thing I say is don't approach them and say, leave a 5-star review. I say, leave an honest review because that's what builds in I think trust with your other listeners when they get to your page. If they just see 5-star reviews and everything's gloating, then that might get turned off a little bit, right? I say just leave an honest review. So one, build your queue up 5 to 8 episodes, and number two, do your research, find another show out there, pick out bits and pieces that you like, and then decide what's the journey that you're going to take listeners on. Are you going to take them through a how-to type show, or are you going to take them through an emotional roller coaster where you're talking with people about maybe losses and then how do they overcome that? Like, figure out what that journey is, write that down, and then you can always adjust that too. But really kind of have those three things in place and then just launch and then stay consistent. That's the one thing that I think people fail at. You and I chatted before we hit record. About 90% of people who start a podcast don't make it to episode 7. It's because they don't have that queue built up. They think it's more work. They think they're going to be the next Joe Rogan, right? Like they just need to go launch that thing, and they need to put in a little bit of work, but stay consistent. My show drops every Friday at 7 a.m. Pacific for the last 4 or 5 years now. And if you can do that, your listeners will start to pick up on it. Plus, they'll get those reminders from Apple and YouTube that, hey, this show's about to launch, right? So stay consistent. That's a big one. That's a big one. And then just don't quit. If you want to be successful in podcasting, just don't quit, because everyone else will, and you'll end up being successful in it.
Yeah, that should motivate you if you're really motivated to go do this, right?
Yeah,
That most
totally.
people are going to quit at 7. I often tell people that your first show is going to be horrible. Just get over it.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
it's
Totally.
gonna you're not gonna like how you sound. I definitely don't like how I sound even after however many shows. But yeah, you got to get past that, and
Yep.
you're not going to get to show 20 without getting the first one done,
Yep.
uh,
Yeah.
or the seventh one, right? I
Right.
love that. I love those, the 3 or 4 things to think through, even down to being consistent and go and even having those batched up in the very beginning. Like you said, it can be pretty overwhelming, and especially in the very beginning. I knew I had to build a team to help me produce the show. And I think if I hadn't have done that, then I would have quit a long time ago.
Mhm.
I mean, I would have, there's
It's
no way I could have kept up.
it's tough, man. And I do everything on my own. I do all the editing and promoting, publishing, all of that.
Wow.
And it's a lot of work, but I love doing it. It's really what I'm passionate about. And so I think if people can realize that they're getting into something that's going to either, if they have the money to build a team and have them do that, or they have the resources to do that, I think that's awesome. But don't let the work hold you back from sharing your story. Put in a little bit of work and it will pay off in the end. I promise you. Just put your story out there, because it will impact, not it may, even if it just impacts one person, you're good. But I think it'll impact way more than you expect.
What about the level of equipment that people need? And you mentioned, you briefly hit this earlier, but I thought it's worth mentioning again or going in more in depth, because often people think they got to have a fancy mic like this, and I didn't have this till probably 200 or 300 shows ago. So
Yeah.
I had an $80 mic from Amazon, which worked great, right? I've done
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of interviews with it. And so I just, anyway, I'd love your opinion about type of equipment or anything specific to get a listener started, or yeah, when they're getting going.
It's so important. I mean, I think that does hang up a lot of people, like, oh my gosh, I have to have the right equipment and things like that. Here, your webcam on your laptop works just fine. If you really want to launch a podcast, just do it. I mean, now you can start your show for free on Anchor in 5 minutes. You create an account and you set it up. But when I first started, I had just a laptop webcam, and then I added a Logitech webcam, and I upgraded that a couple times, and I went to a Canon camera, and then now I have the Sony ZV-E10. So I've upgraded quite a bit over the years. And this microphone, I've upgraded just like 4 or 5 mics now. Like this is now the Shure SM7B, but like you don't have to worry about the expensive stuff to get started. You can literally just use your phone and some headphones if you really wanted to just launch this thing. Don't let that hold you back. Increase, add different equipment as you go down the road. But if you want to get out there, just do it. Don't let that, price points hold you back. I used a $40 snowball mic for the first year and a half that I was doing podcasting. So, I think just get into it. Find something cheap on Amazon. You might find some used ones on Facebook Marketplace, but just get started, man.
Awesome. Erik, one big thing that we've always struggled with, and I get questions about this too, is finding guests.
Mm.
Right. And I mean, finding as many as we've had to find. I mean, I know early on, I just remember this because it was such a major ordeal to get 30 shows a month. We might have to send 300 to 400 invites. Okay,
Yeah,
especially early, and we have a lot more people now that want to be on the show, right? So it's a lot
sure.
easier now. But early on, I mean, it's somebody is just going nonstop, just finding enough guests almost, right?
Yeah.
But so maybe speak to how you find guests in the beginning, and then when and how you find even bigger name guests, when you should do that, and how you pursue them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people take the same exact approach when it comes to inviting guests on their show. What they have is they have this template of like, hey, here's my show. I want you to be a guest on my show. And they just send that to their DMs or their email it. I did that at the beginning. Don't do that. Don't do that. Here's what I would recommend doing is I would recommend, and I've been doing this really since probably episode 50 of the very first podcast I started, is I quickly realized that that wasn't very effective. And so what I do now is I actually pull out my phone and I'll send a selfie video no longer than 30 seconds. It has to be 30 seconds or less. But I might, if I was reaching out to Ed Milet, I might go, Ed, what's going on? It's Erik Allen out here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I love your book. Power of One More, man. It's so good. It's impacted my life. Let me help you promote that. I want to help you get sales on that thing. Let's talk about that book. Let's do it, man. Here's below's my calendar link. Let's make it happen. 30 seconds. And the way I approach it is I want to bring value to them. Let me help you promote this. Hey, I saw you launch this course. Let me help you promote that. Oh, you got a new book? Let's promote the book. You got an event coming up? Let's promote the event. Approach it like that. Let me help you promote this. People love free marketing. They love free, right? Free exposure to their products, right? And so if I approach them and say, hey, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes or let's go have a coffee chat? No, they're going to say no. But if I say, let me help you promote this product that you have so you can make money, heck yeah, let me come on your show and do that. That's the way to approach your guests. Bring value to them. It's not about your show. What value can you help them bring? And so, man, let me help you promote that book. Let me help you promote that event.
Should they do that? I have a couple questions about that as well.
Yeah.
But as far, when should they do that? Should they reach out to somebody like that within the first few shows? Should they wait till they got 100 episodes, so many downloads, or when should they do that?
Yeah, you can really, I think you can definitely try to reach out to bigger name guests, but I would start at someone who's a couple steps ahead of you. If you've got 10 shows out or you're just starting, find someone who's got 10, 15, maybe 30, or maybe even 50 episodes out, right? Approach them and say, man, I saw you're doing a great job on your podcast, or hey, I'd love to help you promote that, right? I would start there. But as you start to grow and you start to increase the number of downloads or increase the number of episodes that you release, then you could start to reach out to those folks. I mean, I got lucky, and I think that it's luck and hard work. But like I had Sean Whalen was episode 8 or 6, and then Ed Milet was episode 12 on my show, right? And then it just started taking off from there. And now I've been blessed to speak to amazing people, 240 plus shows now on the Erik Allen show. But I started with doing show swaps. I found people who had similar podcast sizes as me. Hey, can we just do a show swap? You come on my show, let's talk about you, and I'll come on your show and talk about that. That's the greatest way to improve or to increase your exposure, right? Also, be a guest on other people's shows. That's another great way to blow up your show. In 2020, I set a goal to be a guest on 50 podcasts, and I only did 25. And so at the end of the year, it's like, that's all I got, 25. And so I went into 2021. I said, I'm gonna be a guest on 100 podcasts this year. Now, I was also going to release 100 of my own show that year. So people thought I was crazy. But I finished that show doing 117 interviews on other people's podcasts and released 100 of my own. And that's when my show really hit that hockey stick. And that's really where I started to make a bigger impact.
Some great suggestions. What about, you mentioned, I love the video idea, right? Sending them a video, you're calling them by name. It's
Yeah.
obvious it's something you're very focused on them. It's not something you're just sending to hundreds of people. Where do you send it? How do you get that to them or in front of them?
Yeah, great question. I book 99% of my guests through Instagram DM. I just send it to their DM on Instagram. Now, I might follow up that video with just a very short message. Hey, Ed, podcast question for you, or podcast interview request, right? Like, please check out the video. I don't go into detail in the text. I want them to be curious about that video where they will listen to it and hear my passion, because I'm very sincere when I send those videos, right? And I want to make sure that when they hear my voice, they go, man, this guy, he's real. Like, he's the real deal. Like, he definitely is not just trying to get me on there to say he was on my show. Like, he's sincere about actually bringing value.
Great advice, man. That is incredible. What about you talked about, yeah, guesting on other shows? Are you picking them the same way? Say they're a little bit ahead of you. Or are you trying to find, is there a certain number of downloads you're looking for on certain shows? How are you maximizing your impact there?
Yeah, really. So there's a couple things. One, I would reach out. There's a lot of Facebook groups where you can find a guest or be a guest on podcasts, right? There's a ton out there. And that's what really helped me to launch my show at that time. To get booked on 100 shows, I was in probably 6 or 7 different Facebook groups, and I was posting in each of those groups once a quarter. And I would say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I have a goal to be a guest on 100 podcasts this year. Here's my story. If you're interested, there's a good fit. Let's make it happen. And I would get 10, 15 bookings off of each of those posts every time. So that really helped me a lot. Now, when it comes to like finding other shows, I really find shows that are more topic similar versus size. And the reason I say that is I want people to understand that don't look at the numbers when you first get started, because it can be very detrimental to your mindset. Yes, I'm gonna get 1,000 downloads per episode, and you go in there and you get 20, and you're like, dang it, it's not working. I want to quit. So I always tell my students to come through my course. I didn't look at numbers, downloads for 5 years. I just didn't care. I did podcasting because I'm passionate about it and I love what I get to do. And now I look occasionally, but it's like, if I'm bringing value to somebody, I don't care about the numbers. If one person downloads that show, that's all that matters to me, right? Too many people get hung up on the numbers and they end up quitting. So I think when you're reaching out to other podcasts, find a similar topic and find somebody that you follow, connect with them on Instagram, make some comments on their posts, like start to engage with them on there, and then reach out. Hey man, I've been following you for a while. I love what you're doing. You're doing some awesome stuff. I'd love to see if maybe we could do a show swap or something like that. And that really will help you build your brand, your network, your relationships as a podcaster.
What metrics do you track? You talked about, man, don't focus on it too much in the beginning, right? It can be so
Yeah,
discouraging. However, I love tracking things, right? So we know we're improving, or maybe what is working, what is not. What do you
sure.
track?
For me, I really will go in so I use Blueberry as my host for podcasts, and I would definitely recommend them. Great customer service, but they have great analytics. I used Anchor before, which was free, made the jump to Blueberry about a year and a half ago, but their back office really gives me a lot of analytics in regards to how many of my listeners are listening to 75% or more of my show. And so that's what's interesting to me is there a fall off where people stop listening? And right now, 95% are listening to 75% or more. And so I'm okay with that. I think that's a pretty good metric for me. There's downloads, right? I can look at some shows might do 50. Some shows might do 2,000. It depends on my guest, depends on if they share it with their network, if they accept the collaboration, right? So I don't get too hung up on the numbers, but more when I'm looking at that, I want to understand how much of my show are people listening to, right? And that's really the only basic the number that I look at. Now I check listennotes.com. That'll tell you where your show is ranked globally. I'm blessed to have my show ranked in the top 1.5% globally. But so I really check that, and I check how long people are actually staying on to listen to my show. But again, I don't get hung up on any of the numbers. It's all just like, okay, cool, whatever. I know that I'm making impact at least one person's listening to that show, right? And so that's what I look at as a podcaster. I think we can get hung up on numbers where people are reaching out and their sponsors and, oh, how many downloads do you get? I don't know. The reason I say I don't know is because when I had Anchor for 4.5 years, and I got, I don't know, 20,000 downloads on there. But then I switched to Blueberry. In the podcast world, when you switch a host site, your numbers go back to zero. So you start over literally. And so I just don't get hung up with the numbers. I'm like, hey, I don't know exactly how many downloads I have, but I can tell you that my show is ranked in the top 1.5% globally, and we're making an impact. And here's who's been on my show. And so if you want to work with me, great. If not, I totally understand. Like, I have to just have that be okay with, I'm putting out the show because I love it.
Love that. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, picking something you're passionate about.
Yeah.
It's so helpful, right?
Yeah.
You're coming to work or you're going to podcast and you're going to get to talk about something you're passionate about, or interview somebody that's really good at something you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Right. That's so helpful. Are there ways that, and maybe we shouldn't get too hung up on it. But any tips on increasing, right, your
Yeah.
reach, right? And get
Totally.
in front of more people.
Number one, best thing that you can do is be a guest on other people's shows. That is number one, in my opinion, how you grow your show is be a guest on other people's shows, because you don't know what listeners are going to listen to that show. Now, I've been a guest on a show where a guy lived in Tennessee, and then a radio station in Tennessee heard my episode on his show and reached out to me and said, Erik, we'd like to interview you. Well, then they interviewed me, and then they emailed me like 3 months later and said, Erik, we forgot to send you the link, but your show has 50,000 downloads. So all because I was on a show in Tennessee that someone else heard. It's the best way to get exposure is be a guest on other people's shows. That's the number one way to increase your shows. Also share it. Like when you're a guest on other people's shows, share it with your network. That's a respectful thing. Like on this show will get shared to my network because I love being able to do that when the shows come out, right? It gives you exposure to your show. It gives people in my network like, oh man, that's an awesome show. I'm going to start listening to that. It's the same way. If I'm the host, I'm sharing that out to all platforms. So my show, when it goes out to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, like all audio formats. I get it out as far as I can. Some are going to be maybe 3 people watch it, but then on other platforms, maybe you have 2,000. It just depends. And there's going to be different people on different platforms. So I say, as much as you can get your show out, do that and be a guest on as many shows as you can.
Yeah, that's so valuable. I've slacked off the last probably year and a half or so myself. I used to also try to guest probably at least show, I don't know, 2, 3 shows a week sometimes, and then sometimes
Yeah.
I'll go a month and none, and but have a yearly like goal that I'm trying to do or something like that. But no doubt, that's when other people start, they hear you, like you said, and they're asking you to be on their show as well, right?
Yep.
With that being said, oftentimes if you haven't been interviewed much or been or a host on a show, so you're a little nervous, right, about
Yeah.
being interviewed. You don't know what they're going to ask, and I get those questions all the time. Well, how do I know I'm prepared? And I'm going to sound crazy, right? All these things, right? How do you know you're prepared, right, Erik? How do you maybe nail down your story or
Mhm.
maybe even prepare the host, so they know how to have a good interview with you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think for me is if you've got a story to tell, write it down and just read it and go over it as much as you can. I mean, I am writing a book. It's in the draft right now. So like I've been writing that so I understand my story. But if you're like new and you're like, how do I get this? How do I get my story lined up? Write it down and read it. And if maybe have somebody that's close to you to read it as well. Oh, is that a good story? It doesn't even have to be a long story. It could just be like bullet points. Like, oh, I want to talk about this because I'm passionate about waking up early. I'm passionate about spending that time in the morning. Oh, I got to read a book every day because that helps me grow. Like, talk about things that you're passionate about. And then you never get into these gotcha type situations, right? I always want to just express to my guests, like, I'm never going to ask you the gotcha type questions. I'm going to ask you about what you and what you know, because I'm interested, truly interested in what you do to do what you're doing today. Like that's my number one goal is I want to bring value to you, but I'm so interested in learning. I heard someone talk about podcasting. It's like when you're listening to a podcast, you're almost like this kind of creeper guy, so to speak, like listening into an intimate conversation between 2 people. Right. And that might sound funny, but it truly is. Like people that are listening to this show, they're like getting to sit next to you and I having a conversation. And I think that's so important and so special for someone to be able to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely do that type of stuff. Yeah, it's
Uh,
always good. I think podcast is so good. And then go join Toastmasters. I'm a big proponent of Toastmasters, and that has helped me curate my story. It's helped me get better publicly speaking. It's helped me get better in dropping the uhs and the ums and all that stuff. Like, go join some sort of group like Toastmasters as well.
I helped a friend one time start a podcast, and he was a professional speaker, like a highly paid speaker, but he never had a podcast. you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
so we would meet maybe every other week, 30 minutes to an hour, and I would help him with it, getting his podcast going, and then he would help me with some public speaking, and we would tally every time we heard a or a ah from each other in the, a little competition, right? Just during
Yeah.
the call, and that was so helpful just to get me thinking that way. And I haven't done it enough lately, but that was so helpful. Another thing you mentioned was writing down your story. It just helps you be prepared, right? And you're going to
Totally.
come with more confidence into the interview because you've thought through this.
Yeah.
And I've seen people do this a number of ways. Some people put sticky notes all over their screen so they have like something to remind them they can be looking at, or they have a
Yeah.
document open that has their story. But I hired a speaking coach a number of years ago. I was speaking in front of thousands of people at one of my first biggest events to speak at. And I thought, oh my goodness, I only had 10 minutes, but it's like the first 10 minutes I'm opening this event, and it was a big opportunity. So I hired the speaking coach, and he said exactly what you said. He's like, we're going to write this out and we're going to get every word and to maximize that 10 minutes. But what that did for me is we laid out like 5 topics, like
Mhm.
5 bullets, and then just some details under each one. It also allowed me to be able to build on those, right? So I can make it into a 30-minute or 45-minute or hour-long presentation, or I can make it 10 minutes,
Yeah.
and still hit those things that I'm passionate about. I love that. Even something like Toastmasters as well. Well,
Mhm.
Erik, any other tips on podcasting specifically you want to leave the listeners with before we jump to a few other things?
No, I mean, I think I'm so passionate about podcasting. And I think that if you have a story, and we all do, if you have a brand or a company, you need to share it. And whether you put that out publicly, but record it and share it with your family for legacies to come. My 10-year-old interviewed my 89-year-old grandma for a school project earlier this year. And we didn't put that on YouTube, but it was such a great interview. And my son thought of these questions that I would never have thought to ask asked my grandma. And I didn't even know stuff about my grandma that he was asking about. But I get to save that video forever, and that video gets to change. So you have a story, you have a brand, a company, record it, put it on video. Even if you don't put it out publicly, save it for your legacy.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.